Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. My name is Matthew, and today we're not going to be doing a figure comparison like how we usually do. I'm going to be doing more of a discussion video talking about how Playmates has changed their figures over the years from their first batch of Godzilla vs. Kong figures to their new Godzilla Kong the New Empire figures. Now, I'm going to primarily also just be glossing over the classic series line, as I know that those were obviously some hit or miss figures, but given the circumstances those were put out, technically speaking, the classic series line isn't really supposed to exist. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but like it was created in such a way where, like, if you don't remember, basically the movie was supposed to release at a certain time, and Playmates already had these figures, but the movie got delayed, so they're like, oh wait, how do we produce Godzilla Kong figures that quickly? So they had to scramble, find some figures, strike a deal with Bandai, and have like those very rushly made figures, which is why we ended up with such glorious 10 out of 10 figure of the decade, like the Shin Godzilla. And Space Godzilla, while it is still pretty bad, it's nowhere near as bad as this guy was. But again, you gotta understand circumstances as far as that's concerned. But that was back in 2019, 2020. Well, mainly 2020 because that's when the figures originally started rolling out, and the movie was set for a I think a March 2020 release, and then it was bumped to November 2020, and then proceeded to get bumped back to March of 2021. So now we're in, as I'm recording this, July of 2024, and we've got a whole assortment of Godzilla versus Kong and X Kong, the New Empire figures to talk about. So let's go ahead and pretty much talk about like the quality differences, how things have changed, some things I like about the older figures compared to the new ones, some things I think the newer ones do a lot better than the older ones, some things that I feel like should need to be fixed on some other releases, etc. So let's go ahead and start. So first of all, I want to talk about the Kongs. And I know people are going to be saying, well, why are you waiting? Why aren't you going to wait on the upcoming Battle Axe Kong that was recently revealed? Well, the reason why is because I feel like, because they're both open mouth sculpts, this kind of like, and plus they're basically in the same exact pose, there's really not a whole lot of reason for me to wait on the Battle Axe Kong, especially because like the Battle Axe Kong from the New Empire is just going to be using this one's mold, just with this one's Battle Axe. But back to the task at hand. I think, personally, from a Sculpt and Paint, let's talk about Sculpt and Paint. These two are very similar in a lot of ways, but also a lot different. See, the original GVK Battle Axe Kong had a lot of good dry brushing across its body, giving it a much more dark and grittier look. However, the sculpt itself was really more on the shallow side. I will say, like, when it comes to like the softer rubber parts, it has a bit more of like the detail you find, and it looks much more crisp. But however, even like when you look at the back, it's still there, obviously, but it just feels a little bit more smoothened out. And also, as far as like the mold itself goes, it's not necessarily the best, especially with the teeth, how it's all like so big on one platter and the tongue is so big in there. And it just looks more cartoonish rather than like, of course it's like not gonna be realistic, but what I mean to really say is it just doesn't pull off the look the way it should. Although I will give it praise where the eyes are painted, like I do like how the eyes are applied. That being said, it also kind of suffers from the problem of the face paint and the like the paint on the chest is just too dark. Kong was never like a full solid charcoal black creature like Godzilla was. He was primarily like lighter colored. This pulls off the look a lot better because aside from great fur tones, Kong's design really hasn't changed much aside from scarring. And I understand why, because of his battle with Godzilla. But of course, speaking of the scars, we have the scars on here, which I have to say, I think the GVK Kong does it a little bit better. But again, it looks fine either way. But something that the GXK Kong does exponentially better is the sculpt work. Because you look at the backs here, this is good. It's shallow, but it gets the job done. This is rigged. Like, this has some great depth to it. Like, this is defined detail at its greatest. And also the paintwork. Well, I'm not going to say it's like the best in the world. The paintwork is, in my opinion, leaps and bounds better than the GVK Kong because the teeth are painted a bit better. The only thing really is that they're not painted fully on either side. Let me just zoom in there. There you go. Eyes are not painted very well, although the application itself, I mean, the black dots get the job done, but they just kind of go cross-eyed. Teeth are, again, painted better on this one. Scarring's alright. The Beast Glove, bit of an unfair comparison because the GVK Con does not have it, but it's painted very industrial and almost painted all the way. Not all the way, but it does, again, get the job done. The chest and the face paint, that's really where my favoritism goes towards this guy because he has the, like, kind of gray spray and then kind of gray coloring compared to, like, the much more darker, riggedy kind of old man Kong gray. And then you kind of get to like the feet, which makes sense, you know, that's going to be like the most dirty part of the body. And then whereas here it's like primarily all black. So as far as like the coloring goes, I have to give it to the GXK Kong. Now, I feel like it's something that he does better than him would have to be the dry brushing. If he had the dry brushing of this Kong, best Playmates Con, no debate, no comparison. We wouldn't even need to do this comparison, that's what. But of course, maybe tone it down a little bit, maybe give it towards the back, because of course that's where we're going to be seeing a lot of, like, say, damage and all that dirty stuff you see in the film. That's probably where it's going to primarily be. Something that I also want to talk about is the posability. Now, pretty much speaking, across these two figures, nothing has changed. They have basically the same articulation count with like swivels at the head, swivel hinge shoulders, swivel hinge elbows, swivel wrists, swivel hinge hips, and hinge knees. That's basically the same thing. However, I will say that I find a bit more range on the original just because like it doesn't have, of course, for one, it doesn't have the Beast Glove, but it just feels more fluid. Like, it's not because it's an older figure, it's always felt this way. And, like, it always has, like, such a softer feel, and you can get a little bit more range out of it, versus this one, where you don't really get all that much range. Well, I mean, of course, you do get a lot of range, but it doesn't feel... It feels tighter, I should say. This feels just right. Like, as far as stiffness goes, this feels just right. Loose enough to where you can kind of glide the joints, but not loose enough to where it just flops. However, that also being said, this guy also doesn't have the wrist joint, but the other Battle Axe Kong will. So, as far as sheer posability goes, again, they're kind of even. I like the quality of the joints on this one a bit better than this one, because of how, well, they're just right, as opposed to it being like a little bit more on the stiff side. But another thing I want to also talk about is the accessories in specific. See, in case if you haven't really caught on, the Beast Glove doesn't really count as an accessory because it's pre-molded with the figure. You can't take this off. And if you try to, oh boy, you're going to be in for a bad figure. But that being said, this guy comes with a heave. Pretty cool. It's one of those new futuristic heaves. I don't really have a lot to say about this heave, and even after doing like 5,000 plus videos with this thing, I still don't have a lot to say about it. This Kong comes with his battle axe, and it's not like the best painted in the world, because like I own two of the battle axe Kongs. Let me pull up the other one. And as you can probably are going to see in just a sec, this one has a lot more brown on it than the my original one. Because like you can kind of see like a brown splotch there, and then especially on this side, like oh boy, they went ham on the brown wash. So that's That's a bit on the more unfortunate side of things, so it doesn't really give much of a glowing effect. Then again, you could be the Hong Kong Battle Kong, where you just have one side purple, the other one blank. Ha ha. However, the one thing that I feel like the Kong GVK has superior is definitely going to be that battle damage. Now, of course, battle damage is a kind of a plus or a minus. -1, I guess you could say. Wrong kaiju. Anyway, why is it such a plus and a minus? Well, for pluses, it gives kids and I guess adult collectors a bit more of variety on the shelf. You can have it without the battle damage or with the battle damage. I personally, for one, don't mind the battle damage. It's not like the worst thing in the world. However, the minus is that you can, if you're not careful with this thing, or your kids are not careful with this thing, they could lose that piece easily. Like, that's about the size of like 2 M&Ms. That's how small it is. It's literally not even, well, actually it's bigger than my thumbnail, but it's like that big compared to my thumb. Like, it's a pretty thin piece of rubber plastic. And also, when it goes up for resale, 5 times out of 10, I always see this thing without its battle damage. And it's honestly kind of a problem if you're reselling these things, because in like, I'm gonna guess like 10 years from now, when the GVK line is long gone, guess what? All the Playmates figures in the world are not gonna have their battle damage anymore, except for mine, because I'm gonna keep mine nice and cozy, hopefully. So that's primarily where my concern's at. But as of right now, the sheer amount of accessories has to go to the Playmates Kong from GVK. And as it stands, I kind of prefer the accessories of this guy as opposed to him. However, ultimately, I think that as far as like the better figure is concerned, quality-wise, it's got to be this one. Again, the sculpt and paint is just a lot better. It has the same amount of articulation minus the hand. And even though it doesn't come with like the best accessory, because it really should have came with the axe in my opinion, because he literally holds it at the end of the movie with the Beast Club. I don't see why he wouldn't. It's automatically clear that, you know, as good as this guy was, he's kind of like the new Battle Axe Kong, because he's literally getting a Battle Axe variant pretty soon. So, yeah, so state your pick. Next, I want to talk about the Godzillas. And I know that this might seem more of a weird comparison because there is obviously a heat ray Godzilla that the GXK line had, that being this guy. However, these two are essentially pretty much the same exact figure, so that's not what we're going to primarily be judging off of, even though that there are several differences. We're going to be primarily, again, focusing on quality. And that being said, let's talk about the overall, well, let's actually just take out the beam effects for both. There you go, there's beam for him. Oh, it's Godzilla Evolved fell over. Alright, so, what can I really say about, well, the sculpt and paint on both? Well, it's a bit more even this time around. As far as the sculpt and paint, I have to honestly say the Evolved Godzilla has the edge. Because if you just take a clear look at the head sculpts for both figures, you can automatically tell that there's a lot more detail to be found on the Evolved versus the original. And you can just kind of tell, like, especially where the gills are at, they're just a lot more defined on the Evolved. And plus the painting on the tongue and the teeth just look a lot better and consistent per unit, especially where this one is just whatever that is. Also, the accessory will scuff the paint over time. I mean, it'll probably do it to this one too, but it won't be as detrimental to it. I've had this thing for at least a month or two now. It's been relatively in good condition. Not too bad. Actually, I think I've had this thing 3 months. Wow, time flies by fast, doesn't it? Also, it has the advantage of having better eye placement. While the eye is bigger and just looks overall goofier, it still looks better versus this. This doesn't look that bad. That looks horrendous. Also, has paint on the front of the neck, and we have spines that are painted, actually. Whether this one has neither of those, it has a blue wash that you can find a bit more on the, not on the neck, but kind of more on the body itself. And honestly, the transition just doesn't really work all that well. Something I also have to give kudos to the new one for is the inclusion of just, again, more paint mixed in with more detail, i.e. the arms. The arms here, while they are very detailed, they're kind of soft. They're very soft detailed, and has again that blue wash, which while it does do some favors, it's not really enough to bring out anything, and has very tiny painted claws. Like, they might as well not even be painted, versus these ones, which are much more extended this go around, probably because of the design, but again, has a lot better painted claws, and just has a lot better detailing. The only real nitpick I have is really the spine, which is painted on the box, but not painted here. Kind of an iffy part. Also, the chest, again, just looks a lot better. Would have liked this maybe like a spray now looking at it for the original, but again, this is where it like kind of meets that sort of like it really puts that $10 to good use with the olive green kind of washed in with the blue base, and that honestly looks really good. Same thing can be said about the legs. While it is true that this head doesn't have the wash, and both of them are rather comparable in terms of detail, and both of them have the same exact type of paint on the feet, although one is lighter than the other, it just looks, again, the combo of the detail just looks a lot better on the Evolved, even though this one does have the blue wash. Something that I think the original does better than the Evolved is the transition from the spines to the tail paint. Because this is light blue, this is kind of like orange-ish, versus red versus blue. So it just looks a little bit more cleaner. However, that's basically the only advantage this guy has, as even like the quality of the spray, it's so easy, like vulnerable to chip off and doesn't go all the way, versus this one where it actually does go all the way and paints the Thagamizers, even though this one doesn't have the Thagamizer. Ow! I just stabbed myself right on that point. Ow! That actually kind of hurt. Also, the build quality itself. That's something I also forgot to mention. The build quality just feels a lot better on this one. Even though there's an obvious seam, it's not as bad as it is on here, because even then, when you turn the head, you kind of can get that, like, whole thing to split. If you do it hard enough, the whole thing will come apart. I'm pretty sure it'll happen to this one, but hey, lesson learned, at least. So, and as far as, like, the translucent plastic quality goes, I'm gonna have to give it to this one, just because it obviously both of them are see-through, but this one just looks a little misty by comparison to this one. This one still looks really cool, though. So, as far as like the Sculpt Paint is concerned, I gotta give it to the Evolved, because it has some advantages that this one does not have, and again, it just looks like overall the better figure. As far as articulation goes, really nothing has changed, aside from one thing. But jaws, both of them can go up and down. No movement in the head. I know it looks like I'm moving it, but trust me, it's not meant to move. The arms can go forward, back. On both of them, they can both do a full 360. Legs can go up and down, not a full 360 on both of them, as you can see here. This one's feet cannot move because they're plugged into the same type of foot joint that the other one is, the head was plugged into. However, here, the feet can move. Interesting. And the ball jointed tail, well, you can kind of go down, up, side, all that good stuff. And you can kind of pretty much spin those suckers all the way around. Versus here, where it's pretty much the same thing. As you can see. So, when it comes to articulation, I again gotta give the advantage to the Evolved, even though fundamentally they are the exact same thing. Because of its feet articulation, that gives it a bit of extra choice when it comes to posability, though each of them are kind of, well, pre-posed. And the last category, again, I gotta do, well, we're not gonna go over, like, the Sculpt Paint, articulation, size, accessories, price, availability, packaging, all that stuff. We're gonna, again, just go over the accessories, which, both of them, again, as you saw earlier, come with their own beam effects. Which is good. However, I have to say that the quality of the accessory has to go to the original. Why? Because look at the difference in the design of the beams. This looks more flame-like. This looks like a flame. Obviously, it's copied off the Monster Spitfire 2014 Onward mold, because if you flip it this way, it's literally just that, just encased in rubber. Versus this, where it just looks so artificial. I know it's a fake monster's beam, but like it doesn't even look like Godzilla's beam. It kind of looked more like this in the film. In fact, I would actually crud, almost knocking over my lamp. This is the beam from the Mechagodzilla. Battle Mechagodzilla with the proton screen. This, in my opinion, looks better than this. In fact, it just looks better, in my opinion. I'm not asking them to reissue it, but at least make it look more like this as opposed to that. But, again, the quality of the beam, I have to at least give the advantage that this does not feel like it'll sag down over time. It may, but it'll take a lot longer versus the other one where it's already drooped. Like, look at this. Look at how low that sits. No, that wasn't like that the whole time. And another advantage or disadvantage would be the battle damage, which, again, take it or leave it. It's right on the chest. A little scab, you can just kind of like... Wait, hold on, I just realized I'm putting it the wrong... No, I'm putting it the right way. You can kind of like pick off, tear off, whatever you want. It's all your choice. There you go. So, as far as like sheer accessories go, I gotta give the edge to the original. Even though this one's beam effect is not bad and even has some bonus splash effects, this one just feels a lot better and just looks a lot better. Only downside is that because this one's a tad bit shorter and a little bit more, well, thicker as opposed to being like soft rubber plastic versus this one where it's a little bit stronger, this one won't sag as easily. And so, overall, I have to honestly say, between the two figures, well, this kind of goes for the line overall, even though the figures do vary somewhat. I honestly have to say that, in my opinion, the winner of who is the better figure line has to be the GXK line. Because not only do they have the better build quality, but they also just feature more articulation than their original predecessors, but also just feature, well, again, better paint application and better sculpting versus the older ones, which are not bad at all, but just, they're kind of outdated now that these guys are here. Although, again, we can have a spot on the show for anybody here. But at the end of the day, I feel like, as time goes on, Playmates starts to make more Godzilla and Kong figures, they're gonna continue making some good figures. Like, it's a shame that the Toho series had to end with Baragon. Like, really? Baragon? That's how you end your Toho series line? I know that's another can of worms, but really? Y'all couldn't have ended it with, like, say, a 6-inch 1954 that's not from Bandai? Whatever. But at this point, this is what we have, and I'm so thankful to have these, because at the end of the day, all these figures are winners in my book. I might be critiquing on some, but at the end of the day, that's how some figures are, that's how some other figures aren't, and I feel like all these are winners. But as for me, I think that these guys are the superior ones to them. With that being said, thank you guys for watching this video. If you guys liked it, definitely subscribe to the channel. Believe in Jesus, accept him as Lord every day, spread the gospel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out, everyone. God bless. Peace out, everyone.